Hello, my name is Masha Nuts, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this gorgeous friendship bracelet. This is definitely not a beginner-friendly tutorial, so if you are a beginner, there is an entire playlist of beginner-friendly tutorials which I'll be linking in the description. Come back to this one where you're a little bit more confident with bracelets, and because I am expecting more intermediate / advanced knotters, this tutorial is going to go a little bit quicker than normal. I'll just be making bigger groups of knots, I guess. But that said, let's get into it. You are going to need 10 colors for this bracelet. 8 of these are going to be for the rainbow and 2 are going to be black and white, or whatever alternate colors you choose for the border. You will need 4 strings for the black, 2 strings for the white, and 1 string each for all of the other colors. All of the strings are roughly 1 meter in length. I started this bracelet with a half triangle end. To save time, there is a separate tutorial on triangle ends. It's linked in the card and in the description. All you need to know is the string order, and that is black, white, 2 black, 1 white, 1 black, and then the rest of the strings are in the order that you want to see them in the bracelet. So mine are in the order of the rainbow. I recommend using the half triangle end. I think it fits the pattern really well, but if you're doing a different kind of start, your strings just need to be in the same order as mine for you to be able to follow this tutorial. Now let's get going. As I warned, I'm going to be going relatively quickly. There's a lot to cover in this one. Take all of the rainbow strings, put them off to the side, and also grab the black string that's closest to the rainbow strings. Put that one off to the side as well. Then we separate the outermost string, which is a black string here, and we're left with 1 white, 2 black, and 1 white string. So 4 strings in total. These 4 strings, one by one, will do a backward knot onto this black string. So the white, the 2 black strings, and then the other white string all do a backward knot onto this black string. Now we can bring back all of those strings that we put off to the side. And that black string we just did the knots onto, it is going to do a row of forward knots along all of the rest of these strings one by one until it reaches the end. The next row is very similar to the first one. We're going to focus on the first 3 strings here. It's a white string and 2 black strings. These 2 black strings do a backward knot each onto the white string, starting with the one that's closest to it and then the next one. Then this white string does a row of forward knots along each of the strings until it reaches the end. Just a normal candy stripe row. I tend to use my fingers to kind of fix the rows and make sure that they're all going straight. It's easier to do this as you're making the bracelet, especially at the beginning. So I'm just, tweaking it a little bit, making it sure that it's perfect. We're going to do the next 2 rows together. And when I say rows, I mean the candy stripe shape row. We're going to take the outermost string, which is a black string, and the 3 strings that follow it, which are a black, white, black string. And we're going to do 3 forward knots with this black string onto the 3 after it. We leave it there for now. We focus on the next outermost string, which is this black string, and it does 2 forward knots. Now these 2 black strings that we just did the forward knots with are going to be the focus for the rest of the 2 rows. We can put these off to the side, they're going to get in the way. And we take the first color string and we do 2 backward knots with it onto the 2 black strings. Then we take the next color string and that does 2 backward knots onto the 2 black strings. And we do this for each color string that we have. All of these color strings here are going to do 2 backward knots on these 2 black strings. Once we've done that, the 2 black strings that we were making those backward knots on become active again. This one in the middle, the one that you first make the backward knot on, in all the previous parts I mean, this one does 2 forward knots onto the black string and then the white string, so 1 each. And then the black string after that does 3 forward knots onto the black, white, and black strings. And again, I'm fixing my rows as I'm going along, just with my fingers to make sure that they're still the way that I want them to go. Now we are going to exclude the 2 black strings on the right. We're going to focus on the rest of the strings. The outermost string is now a white string, and it is going to do a row of forward knots until this white string. So again, excluding the 2 ones here, let's do a row of forward knots. So just a candy stripe row. Now, in addition to the 2 black strings that are off to the side, the 2 white strings also go off to the side. This black string is now the outermost string, and it does a row of forward knots until this black string. Now again, these 2 black strings, we put them off to the side. You might be sensing a pattern here. We do this until the yellow string. So each of these strings, these 2 kind of blue ones, this green one, this yellow one, they're all going to do a row of forward knots. Then once they come here and they've completed their row, it and the string that they finished on are going to go off to the right. So for the blue one, it's going to be the blue and the purple one. They go off to the right once it's done. The next one is going to be this dark pink one. It's also going to go off to the right. And so on, basically until you run out of strings, which will be this yellow one. By that point, you're just going to be making 1 knot and not a row of forward knots. To make it a bit easier, this one does 7 forward knots. This one does 5, this one does 3, and this one does 1. Now let's go do all of that and then continue. At this point, the bracelet has sort of evened out. It's going as a straight line. We can separate the strings here with the color strings on the left and the black and white strings on the right, but we are actually going to grab 2 of the black strings that are closest to the center and 1 white string. It would have just been easier for me to say to separate 2 black strings and 1 white string from the right side now that I think about it, but we're gonna ignore that. Starting from left to right, we're going to be doing rows of backward knots. This is a little trickier to explain because it can be hard to figure out which strings we're going to be doing it with. Obviously you have the pattern for reference to see the colors and stuff, but basically we separate the 2 strings on the left. We're going to be making knots onto them. And the first one we're going to be making knots with is this pink one. This pink string does 2 backward knots. The next string that's going to be making knots is going to be the darker pink string here. This one is going to make 4 backward knots. The next string we're going to be making knots with is the purple string. This one is going to be making 6 backward knots. Basically all of the colors that we haven't made rows with yet, except for the black and white. Because once we get here, we're going to have a dark blue string and a black string. This black string is going to do a row of backward knots. And then finally, this white string is going to do a row of backward knots. So all of these strings are going to do rows of backward knots until they reach the edge. It's going to start with, as I said, 2 knots, 4 knots, 6 knots, 8 knots, and 10 knots once we get to the white string. So we're kind of doing this like half triangle thing here. Let's do it. Again, we separate the 2 strings here, and we're starting with this lighter pink color. Interestingly, once we've gotten to this point, this last knot that we did between the white and the black string is the first knot that we did here. So this is the point where the pattern repeats. So when you go back and you repeat this tutorial, again, there's timestamps in the description to make that easy for you, you're going to ignore the first row. I'll remind you about that later. I just wanted to point this out to you now. This is where this happens. So now we're starting kind of the mirror image of what we just did. So we separate all the black and white strings which are on the right side. All the color strings can go off to the left for now. We've already done a knot between these 2 black strings, so we focus on this black string now that's closest to the inside of the bracelet. And it does 2 backward knots, 1 on this white string, 1 on this black string. The outermost string then does 2 backward knots onto the same 2 strings as well. Now this black and white string, we can put them off to the side. These 2 black strings that we just did the knots with, they're going to be the ones that we make all of the color knots onto, similarly to how we did here, except the opposite knots. This time we're doing 2 forward knots. So each of the color strings, starting with the one closest to the black strings, are going to do 2 forward knots, 1 for each of the black strings. Now to keep this consistent with how I started the tutorial, so you can rewind and continue from there, we're going to put this white string off to the side, and the 2 black strings that we just did knots onto are going to do a backward knot each onto the next black string next to it. Then these 3 strings we're going to put off to the side, and the white string that is on the outermost edge is going to do a row of backward knots until this black string here. we put the white string off to the side. And now we're going to start that thing where we take the outermost string, we go to the left in a row of backward knots, and then once we finish, we take the string that we were doing the knots with the last string that we made the knot onto, and put it off to the side. Grabbing the next string, it's going to go all the way until this purple string. Then it and the purple string are going to go off to the side. The next string, which is this blue one, is going to go until this pink one, and then they're going to go off to the side, and so on. The same way we did here, just with backward knots. And we're going to do it until we run out of strings, which will be the yellow one. Now we separate out 5 of the leftmost strings. We're left with the color strings and 1 black string here. And again, we're going to do the same thing we did here, except in opposite knots. It should be the same colors. We're going to do forward knots. We start with this pink one. It does 2 forward knots. Then the next color is the next pink one. It does 4 forward knots. Then the purple one does 6 forward knots. And then the black string does 8 forward knots. Let's do it. And we're done with the repeating part of the pattern. You can skip back to the beginning of this tutorial, there's timestamps in the description to make it easier for you, and you can repeat the pattern as I explained it, except you're going to skip the first row that I explained because we already did this. And you're going to dive straight into the second row, which starts by doing a backward knot with each of these black strings onto the white string, and then a row of forward knots with the white string. All of the colors are in the same place as when we started, the second row, and you can repeat this bracelet as many times as you like until it reaches the length that you want. This place where we finish now is also a great point to finish the bracelet off with a half triangle end. How to do that is covered in the triangle ends tutorial that I referred to earlier. It's in the card and in the description to make it easy for you to find. I'm gonna go finish this bracelet off camera and I'll see you once I'm done. And this is how the bracelet turned out. I started it with a half triangle end. I finished it with one as well as twisted ties. I think they work really well with this bracelet. And yeah, I just love how it matches up when you combine it. This was a really fun bracelet to make. I really enjoyed myself throughout the process. I highly recommend making this one. If you do, make sure to tag me in any pictures. I would love to see them. That's always my favorite when you guys do that. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. My book, The Beginner's Guide to Friendship Bracelets, is out worldwide. You can buy it anywhere you typically buy books. There is also a direct link in the description. And if you're having issues with delivery to your country, my publisher will be able to help you out. That is also the link in the description. I also want to give a special shout out to my patrons and especially my top supporters. It is with their support that I'm able to continue to create videos for this channel, and I really appreciate that. If you also want to become a patron and support the work that I do here, the link to that is in the description as always. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!